ならば
まさか
そう神を生贄に捧げる。我がしもべのために生贄となれ。
オベリスクを神を生贄に。
石津貴様に見せてやる。俺のプライド、俺の魂を受け継ぎししもべの姿。いでよブルーアイズホワイトドラゴン。
未来の姿を変えた。
Happy Year of the Snake. Do snakes count as dragons? I mean, I guess a snake is kinda like a dragon. Dragon is the Pokemon type whose reputation precedes itself. All Pokemon players associate Dragon with a reputation of power, rarity, exclusivity, legendary status, and so on, which originates from real-life cultural assumptions. In many Asian and European cultures and mythologies, dragons are often portrayed as beings who possess power and wisdom beyond human ability, or godly obstacles for heroes of legend to overcome, or symbols of heavenly authority. This meant that people already had a built-in expectation for what a dragon Pokemon would be like. All the developers needed to do was live up to that reputation. As a result, the dragon type's design goal was already predetermined from the outset. It is supposed to be the strongest type. If you've ever played an RPG, you might be familiar with the concept of an ultimate element. You know, almighty, light, dark, chaos, holy, divine, etc. These are exclusively unique element types which don't fit the standard elemental rock paper scissors game structure. They typically break the game's established elemental interactions by being better than all the others in some unique way. This ultimate element could deal bonus damage against every other element, or be unresisted by most enemies, or provide some special secondary bonus which the other elements lack, such as passive immunities, shield piercing, or health draining. Obviously, these would be stupidly overpowered if a player could use them as freely as the other elements, so they tend to be balanced around their exclusivity. They might typically only be unlocked at late game points of the campaign, be hidden behind specific optional requirements or quests, have limited numbers of uses, cost disproportionately higher amounts of MP or resources to cast, only be available as part of specific attacks, etc. Many of these traits match the description of Pokemon's early dragon Pokemon to a T. Many of them are found in one or two fairly hidden locations at low encounter rates, have evolutions tied to rare items or extremely high level requirements, feature high stats and damage output, and deal neutral damage against the majority of other types in the game, with only Steel resisting it for the longest time until Fairy got invented. However, player use is not the primary design purpose behind ultimate elements. Instead, they are primarily intended to be used against the player. These elements typically appear on difficult bosses and enemies late into their respective games. This helps inflate the difficulty of an enemy by introducing a brand new element which a player has never seen before. This is sometimes necessary because players will likely have learned how to counter all the standard elements by this point. So a new element can help throw an unexpected curveball and create a new challenge which the player must adapt to on the fly. While players can still access and use this element since it is a part of the game's elemental system, they'll probably only get to do so under strict conditions or at late stages of the game, after they've already encountered it as a boss fight. Dragonite fulfills this role in the original games perfectly. As Lance's strongest Pokemon, it is the only significant dragon opponent in the game, and is effectively the final boss of the main Elite Four Gauntlet. While your rival still remains as the actual final boss, he is compelling due to the narrative rivalry rather than mechanics or difficulty, as you've already fought his team multiple times by now. This pattern continues in various games moving forwards. Pretty much all notable Dragon-type Pokemon bosses are always the 7th or 8th gym leaders, Elite Four, champions, or even standalone opponents in the case of Ultra Necrozma, Eternamax Eternatus, the AI professors Rhydon, or Volo and Giratina. Quick pause here. Speaking of Volo and Giratina, this video is actually sponsored by Volo. I'm serious, I found an editor to help improve my videos and I am literally paying them with the ad revenue from that Volo video last year. So everybody, please go type "thank you Volo" in the comments below to show your appreciation for everyone's favorite god-seeking psychopath. Now let's get back to the video. In fact, it's probably easier to count the number of times the mainline games don't include a dragon Pokemon as part of either their Elite Four or final boss in some way. For the record, the answer is only once. Only Sun and Moon and their Ultra counterparts don't feature a single dragon in their leagues at all. Not to mention the sheer number of dragon typings on legendaries. It's clear that even till this very day, Game Freak still adamantly holds dragon to a high standard and keeps it reserved as an endgame type, with the addition of Fairy doing little to change that. Now, that's what Dragon's intended role is. Question: did the type live up to that hype? Answer: well, yes, but actually no. But actually yes, but actually no. See, back in early generations, Dragon, as a type, was just sorta average. As a type, the Dragon type was portrayed as the ultimate element via two ways. Offensively, it dealt neutral damage to every other type, with nothing resisting it. And defensively, it resists the types of the 4 stars, which are likely most players' strongest Pokemon. With only a single weakness to Ice, the Dragon type, on paper, seems extremely strong both offensively and defensively. The problem was that the type's sole representative, Dragonite, had zero way to leverage those advantages. Offensively, Dragon moves did not exist. The only Dragon move was the fixed damage Dragon Rage. For Dragonite, this meant the Dragon type was sort of just normal but worse, because it was forced to use normal moves without any stab. Defensively, the resistances were fantastic, but Dragonite's secondary flying typing turned the ice weakness into an Achilles heel, while also negating the electric resistance, making the resulting type combination merely just okay. End result is that the game's sole dragon type ended up not really playing like a dragon. In practice, Dragonite's damage output was far lower than what its huge stats would imply, because it lacked that essential 50% stat bonus, and had questionable bulk due to the crippling ice weakness. While it might be fairly plausible that Dragonite was given this secondary type on purpose to intentionally add a weakness, the developers also slapped flying onto everything with wings, so it's hard to say for sure exactly. That being said, Dragonite made the type combination work anyway, because Dragonite was just a giant feckin' ball of stats and could brute force through opponents even without stab. Turns out it's pretty hard to go wrong with a 600 base stat total, even a bug type would do well with that. This would go on to be a recurring trend with the type in subsequent generations, with many later pseudo-legendaries and legendary Pokemon being granted the Dragon type. It was an odd case of most Dragon Pokemon being overpowered because they were just overpowered. The type itself didn't exactly contribute much to the success of its Pokemon back then. Of course, not every dragon was just a stupidly big stat ball. In fact, Dragon's defensive resistances made it a potentially invaluable secondary type, depending on what it was paired with. Take Kingdra, for example. It only had above average stats by Gen 2 standards, but benefited immensely from the Dragon type, as Water Dragon had only one weakness, being Dragon. This was a possible reason for Generation 1's false dragons. Gyarados and Charizard are frequently noted for looking like dragons but being not that. It's because giving them the dragon type would have made them far too powerful for their respective in-game roles. Gyarados was already one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. Water Dragon would have given it functionally zero weaknesses and thus be utterly game-breaking, especially considering how comically commonplace Magikarp is and how it evolves at a relatively low level. As for Charizard, the dragon subtype would have neutralized Fire's weakness to water, completely screwing up the starter type triangle relationship, so they both got given flying instead as the next best thing, which would later go on to give us the oddity that is Birdkeeper Lance one generation later. Speaking of generations, Dragon is notable for making some of the biggest improvements out of all types over the various generations, simply because it gained actual moves. Gen 2 added 3 Dragon moves of varying power levels for the Dratini line: the 40 power Twister, 60 power Dragon Breath, and 90 power Outrage. These were kinda unimpressive attacks due to poor base power, outrageous reduced confusion penalty, and Dragon being a special type which ran off Dragonite's weaker special attack stat, but they at least made for decent options for Dratini and Dragonair in an in-game playthrough. The Steel type was also added as a resistance against Dragon, though this wasn't exactly a nerf as much as it was a preemptive check for future generations, since Dragon damage didn't exist in the previous generation anyway. Despite these additions though, Dragon still remained mostly the same. It was still more or less only available to bosses, as Kingdra and Dragonite remained difficult to obtain for the average player. While you could now catch Dratini much more easily, being a standard encounter in Blackthorn City compared to the Safari Zone last generation, Johto's abysmally low level curve meant you probably aren't hitting level 55 until you reach the postgame. Most players will only ever encounter it in the context of Claire being the 8th gym leader and Lance being the champion, although really, Lance only gets the Dragon designation via technicality since half his team is the same Pokémon. If you look at his team, he's actually a flying type champion, funnily enough. Generation 3 is the point where Dragon began to properly establish itself as a type. In the previous two generations, Dragon served as more of a mechanical in-game function as an endgame boss for the player to fight in the form of Lance, Claire, and Lance again, rather than a proper Pokemon type. The player would be unlikely to actually use this type in a standard playthrough without going far out of their way to do so. Gen 3 expanded Dragon beyond just that role, and simultaneously made it both more and less exclusive at the same time. It started the trend of Dragon getting used as the de facto legendary Pokemon type, with the Lati twins as a version exclusive event-based duo, and Rayquaza as a box legendary. Flygon and Altaria also made the Dragon type much more accessible to regular players, being evolutions of fairly common Pokemon which lacked any strict requirements to obtain. Winona's Altaria also defied the previous trend by being fought in the mid-game as the 6th gym leader instead of being a late-game boss like in previous generations. It also gained the proper standard damage attack in Dragon Claw, as well as a unique self-buff in Dragon Dance, meaning Dragon-type damage is now an actual thing for players to use and Steel's resistance to it actually matters. For the first time, Dragon started feeling less like an ultimate element and more like a standard one which any player can use. It's now a great type which an average player can make use of in an average playthrough instead of exclusively being a glorified boss designation. That wouldn't last. Generation 4 injected Dragon with so much jet fuel you'd think Monster Hunter's Valstrax had gotten added into the game. Actually, I guess Garchomp is pretty much a jet dragon, isn't it? All 3 box legendaries this generation were dragons. The pseudo legendary was a dragon and also the final boss. The physical special slit allowed Dragonite and Salamence to make full use of their higher attack stats. Outrage got buffed to 120 base power. Draco Meteor got added as the most abusable nuke in the game. This huge surge in power is what fully developed Dragon into the ultimate element it was intended to be. Dealing unresisted neutral damage to everything meant very little when Sid damage was low power, as per previous generations. In order for general use neutral coverage to be powerful, it needs to consistently outdamage most alternate coverage options. Prior generations failed to accomplish this because most dragons had high physical attack stats, but dragon moves operated off special attack, and the highest damaging dragon move most Pokemon could access was 80 power Dragon Claw, since Outrage was Dragonite exclusive and also barely better at 90 power. But Gen 4 finally gave Dragon the high power options it needed to make not resisting Sid damage an actual strength. Dragon Pokemon were now able to enjoy the perks of universal neutral damage and spammed high power moves which destroyed everything in their path. After one more generation of this, it became increasingly clear that the existing countermeasures were not sufficient to deal with this power. Steel and Ice alone were failing to keep dragons in check, as the expanded move versatility now provided dragons with coverage moves or specialized teammates which could counter steel Pokemon, and ice Pokemon's relative frailty made them questionably situational counter options. The game needed a full-on general use dragon hard counter, so in Gen 6 they introduced Fairy, a type explicitly designed to help rebalance the metagame by checking and countering some of the most powerful offensive types. Fairy being a full hard counter did a lot to curb the dragon type's dominance and knock it down a few pegs. Immunity to dragon damage did a lot to curb dragon spam because that now became an opportunity for a free switch-in, and Fairy's super effective damage lets them directly threaten the dragon in a more active fashion compared to the steel type's more passive approach. While dragons can run steel or poison moves to counter fairies, that is still a steep opportunity cost. Those two types being so offensively mediocre meant the dragon is giving up a whole move slot just to beat Fairy and nothing else, leaving them with one less move slot for anti-steal coverage, setup, or other utility. That doesn't mean it's dragged over for dragons though. The type didn't get directly nerfed or lose any of the qualities which made it really good against all the other types. It just has an actual counter it needs to be wary of now. Except for Hydreigon, I guess, since it got hit with the double whammy of also being part dark. How the mighty have fallen, it has never been more Hydreigon. Aside from that pink colored speed bump, it's business as usual for the dragon type. It still fulfills its original in-game role from Gen 1, with dragon Pokemon still regularly being faced as late game or final bosses with giant stats and difficult acquisition conditions. However, it also continues to follow the trend established back in Gen 3 and continued adding new dragon Pokemon of varying degrees of exclusivity. Dragons now reign supreme as the kings of marketing and make regular appearances on legendaries and on box arts to this very day. But they've also been made significantly more accessible and less exclusive than before, and can now be encountered as just regular Pokemon at early stages of the game. We've come so far to the point where many games let you get a dragon before the second badge. Tyrant is obtainable in Silage City, Applin can be found in the route after the first gym, and Cyclizar are just casually roaming around near Iono City. And yet despite all of this, the dragon type never feels devalued. To this very day, it still maintains an illusion of rarity, power, and exclusivity even at this early stage. If anything, getting a dragon early on makes things even more exciting because you'd actually get to use it on your playthrough. It's truly impressive to see how the type has managed to evolve in such meaningful fashion while still remaining true to its original design intent. In fact, it arguably only ever got better at representing the pinnacle of power as time went on, even though it is now much better balanced overall. Quite the grand success story among the types in my opinion. Well, that's a wrap for this video. If you enjoyed the video, then leave a like to show your appreciation, and if you didn't enjoy the video, then leave a like anyway so that the YouTube algorithm thinks I actually make good content. Also, tell me, what's your favorite dragon Pokemon and why? And let me know which type you would like to hear me talk about next in the comments below. That's all I've got for now. Have a good night everybody.